In today's video, we're going to take a look at some of the best loop stations that you can currently buy in the market, looking at a huge range of price points, form factors, and also advanced features that these pedals can operate. Now, this is the second version of this loop stations buyer's guide that I've put together, and this time around, there are a bunch of new pedals from completely different brands. Last time, I predominantly focused on literally pedals, basically just from BOSS and then like one pedal from HeadRush Looperboards, whereas fast forward a couple of years, my word, this market has matured so much. First, let's start off with some of the budget and beginner-friendly loop stations that you can currently get your hands on. Now, the main two predominant ones are the BOSS RC-1 and BOSS RC-5 that occupy this key segment of the market. Now, both of these are very small, single-track loop stations that aren't too intimidating. So the BOSS RC-1 is a very primitive loop station. It doesn't have any advanced fancy features on there. All it does is literally record and play the audio that you input into it. There's no drum machines built on there. There's no advanced MIDI settings built onto it. There isn't any form of onboard menu system. It is just literally a dead pragmatic loop station. So these are very budget friendly and also great to introduce yourself to the whole premise of live looping and getting your timing and all of those together correctly. However, they are a little bit more on the expensive side because they are built by BOSS, the RC-1, so it's got incredible build structure and also warranty that comes with it, so you can obviously get it repaired. But considering what it is, just a very simple loop station, there are some much cheaper alternatives that you can get on Amazon for like 20 or 30 pounds from some of those like little random brands. So if you're looking at a loop station for that sole purpose only of just recording and looping live with a single track with no frills or fancy additions, of course the BOSS RC-1 is a great option, but there are some cheaper comparable pedals from alternative brands that you may want to consider on the likes of Amazon. Now, I personally think the best entry-level loop station is the BOSS RC-5. This achieves everything the BOSS RC-1 does, but for just a little bit extra, you're going to be able to get a built-in drum machine, so you can obviously play along to those drum beats and rhythms, which will allow you to be more creative and also do more with the loop station. So you're not just literally doing a single track loop. You can bring the rhythm section in and out. You can connect external foot switches to this loop station as well, so you can expand its functionality, so you can control the rhythm tracks and turning the rhythm tracks on and off. The cool thing about the BOSS RC-5 is, especially compared to its predecessor, the RC-3 that it's replaced, is the rhythm section on this loop station has been built out. So on prior BOSS looper pedals, when it came to the rhythm section, you had pre-recorded sounds essentially. So you would basically turn the rhythm section on and off, and you'd have this crappy little pre-recorded drum beat that was not really that usable. It sounded like a karaoke machine. Whereas on these newer generations of pedals, they added a much better drum engine, which you'd expect, because BOSS obviously are owned by Roland, and Roland make drum machines and drum brains. So you have much better drum sounds on there from the off, but also you have advanced features within the menu system on the BOSS RC-5 that allows you to access different variations, disable different elements of the drum machine, whether that be turning, the snare or hi-hat on and off. There's so much that you can do in terms of customizing what almost restrictions you have in terms of functionalities and settings that are available on such a small loop station. In addition to this, you also have the new menu system. So you've got the cool loop light indicators with the new record lights, play, overdub, which makes it very obvious and easy for a new looper to understand what they're actually doing and what they're altering on the pedal when you're performing with it. So it's very good for learning with it. And also, one of the most craziest features about this pedal is it has MIDI integration. Even though it's a tiny stomp box looper, because of the new generation of MIDI connectors, which are essentially aux cord cables, you can plug in external MIDI foot controllers, hook this up and transfer MIDI data, MIDI tempo data, so you could sync it and slave it to other loop stations, or you could slave it to music production software, so it's all running off of the same BPM and tempo. So the scale of growth is quite considerable with that BOSS RC-5. Although it's an entry-level pedal, it does allow you to get a huge lifespan out of the product and also get a bit of experience with more advanced things such as exposing yourself to understanding and using MIDI. Also, something very important that I want to make you all aware of in today's video, every single loop station that I'm going to cover, I have gone ahead and created an ultimate guide on every single one of them. So I've created full series of videos. Some of these courses are 50, 60 videos long, where I go through every single setting on all of the pedals. So that means I've got the best knowledge on literally YouTube across all of these products, because I've spent hours and hours and weeks recording, editing, and putting these products together. So if you pick up any of these pedals and you want to learn absolutely everything that they can do, both from basic features all the way up to the advanced features and how you can combine those all together to get the most out of your purchase, because these pedals aren't cheap, so you don't want to be reading a rubbish little manual and then wasting hours and hours of your life trying to get certain things set up. I'll put links down below in the video description over to my official website, where you can check out these product guides for all of the BOSS loop stations, HeadRush loop stations, the new Sheeran loop stations over on there, where you can get detailed tutorial videos that go at a nice, slow and steady pace. Because again, on YouTube, I have to go a little bit quicker because of like audience watch retention. People just literally want to get the information as fast as possible. Whereas Whereas in these tutorials, I can take my time, expand on the knowledge, and go further in depth on particular topics that I just cannot do here on YouTube. So I'll throw links down below if you want to check those out. Help support the channel and also helps you get the most out of all of your equipment. Next, let's talk about probably one of my all-time favorite loop stations, especially over the last couple of years, and that is the BOSS RC-500. Now we're going to go to the next tier of looper pedals, and these are dual track loop stations that essentially give you 2 loop tracks that you can play with, that just makes the versatility of your performances much greater. So you can do proper songs with these looper pedals. You can have a track for your guitar chord progression, then a second track for bringing in a drum beat that you might record on your guitar, or a vocal loop, or section-based looping where you can switch between, you know, a verse and a chorus. Absolutely, ceiling is unlimited when it comes to the performance capabilities with just a simple 2-track looper pedal. Now, my first ever loop station was actually a BOSS RC-30, which was one of the first dual-track loop stations that BOSS made. I personally wouldn't recommend purchasing this now in the modern era. You know, it's almost a decade or 2 old. That pedal, I was about 10, I think, when I picked it up, 10 or 12. I was a young boy, now 24. So I wouldn't recommend getting the BOSS RC-30 in this current era. It's still a great pedal, but the audio quality of it kind of sucks. It works great on 9-volt power supply, but if you're trying to use it on battery, you know, traveling around, busking, playing at weddings, out in a random field somewhere, the audio has a huge decrease when it's running off of battery. I would say a good 50% in terms of quality that comes out of that pedal. So I personally think the best replacement is obviously the BOSS RC-500 for this loop station. Now, wait a minute before you go and buy the BOSS RC-500, because there's actually a brand new loop station that launched about 2 weeks ago that I think might be better than the BOSS RC-500, but we'll get onto that one next. Now, with the BOSS RC-500, you have a new sexy looking loop station. It's in this beautiful red color, looks like almost like Ferrari red, and it has got 3 pedals on the looper pedal. On the BOSS RC-30, it had 2 foot switches, and those 2 foot switches made it a little bit difficult sometimes for new people to switch between track 1 and track 2. There was a lot of shortcuts you had to trigger. You had to hold down foot switch for a couple of seconds, you had to press 2 pedals at once, quite clunky. Whereas with the 3 buttons on the BOSS RC-500, this makes the ease of use much better. You have 2 buttons dedicated to record, play, and stop, and then the final button is track select that allows you to switch between track 1 and track 2 very quick and easy. Now, if you don't like this workflow, you can customize these foot switches to do whatever you like within the controller sign, and you can go crazy here. You can really customize the pedal. You can have each foot switch dedicated to a loop track. You can have certain foot switches dedicated to track effects. You can do whatever you like in terms of reassigns. It's pretty much 99% of what you could envision is capable with reassigning these foot switches. It's very, very easy to do, and again, I talk about all of that. It's some videos I've done on YouTube talking about this, but also inside of my ultimate guide on the BOSS RC-500, I show you exactly how to do this and also connect external foot switches and also external MIDI foot controllers in order to really make and get the most out of this pedal. Now, first, you would assume just because it has 2 loop tracks that that's sort of where it ends, but because of all of the newer features that it has, such as MIDI integration, you can connect MIDI foot controllers to it. It's got those small aux connectors at the back for MIDI in and also MIDI out. You can also connect external foot switches or external expression pedals, so you can control track volumes, fading those in and out. But probably the best feature about the BOSS RC-500 is the integrated effects. Now, this has a complete track effects and also input effects section that actually sounds quite good. So you can use this for altering your voice, adding, you know, effects to your guitar, but also adding different effects to the loop tracks once they are recorded and playing back within your performance. And just like the BOSS RC-5 that we just took a look at, the BOSS RC-500 does have the new menu system for the BOSS loop station. So you have those nice loop light indicators saying things are recording, overdubbing, playing back, stopping, and the color code system is beautiful with the blue lights to show that tracks are, you know, blank and empty. The white lights show that you've got something occupying that current loop track. Makes it very easy to use. And again, within the menu system, you can go ahead and even change what these LED lights are actually doing and the meaning behind them. So you can change what the loop light indicators are doing, the way the pedals operate, and as I previously said, obviously the assignments of those pedals. It's a fantastic loop station. However, with all of that being said, and it probably being my best recommendation in this entire video, there's a brand new loop station on the market that's actually made by Ed Sheeran. Now, Ed Sheeran just dropped a load of loop stations, both the Looper Plus and also Looper X, which are both an entry-level loop station and an advanced £1,000 plus loop station that we'll talk about towards the end of this video. But let's focus on the Looper Plus. Now, these pedals aren't made by Ed Sheeran himself. He's not sitting there in a shed building them up. They're actually made by HeadRush. Now, HeadRush are a huge music brand that's obviously owned by In Music as well, so they're part of a huge corporation that owns like Alesis, etc. So HeadRush already had a few loop stations on the market, including obviously some of their guitar effects pedals, but of course the HeadRush Looperboard was probably their most iconic product that they've released out of everything that they've done. Now, basically, Ed Sheeran has taken the platform of the HeadRush Looperboard, and then together they've built upon that to create a new generation of these pedals that just takes it to a whole nother level. pedal. Now, the HeadRush Looperboard is still available as a separate loop station, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, but let's focus on the Looper Plus, which is the entry-level Sheeran loop station. Now, this loop station has most of the capabilities of the BOSS RC-500. It can do pretty much everything that pedal can do. The only couple of things that it doesn't have is built-in track effects and loop effects on the Sheeran Plus. The multiply version does, the big £1,000 pedal. So the entry-level pedal doesn't have any effects built into it. And also there's a few things when it comes to operating the loop station, such as not having easy access to track volume. You know, the BOSS RC-500's got really easy track faders for turning loop tracks up and down. Don't really have that on the Looper Plus, but I think overall the Looper Plus is the better loop station when it comes to just feeling a little bit more modern, got better build quality, and also ease of use for somebody who wants to get into dual track looping. Now, the Ed Sheeran Looper Plus, it's got multiple different modes you can run it in. You can run it in single, so when it first arrives, it runs exactly like a BOSS RC-20 or 20XL, I think they were called back in the day, which was the loop station Ed Sheeran used in his performance on SBTV when he did You Need Me, I Don't Need You, one of his first viral sort of YouTube video performances. That was a single track BOSS loop station that had two pedals, and you just basically, it was just like a simple stomp box. That's how the Sheeran Looper Plus operates straight out of the box, which is great. But then just by pressing the encoder dial, you can dive straight into the menu and completely customize and revolutionize how this pedal works way easier than the BOSS RC-500. I would say the BOSS RC-500 requires you to purchase my online course in order to truly understand what it can do, because the manual and parameter guide is just crap. BOSS just don't know how to make a good manual anymore like they did back in the day. They really scrimp on the information. So you have a lot of things the RC-500 can do, but it takes you ages to figure out how to do them unless someone actually shows you. Whereas with the Looper pedal by Ed Sheeran, the Looper Plus, so easy to change between the modes. The menu system is very simple, and then you could just change between all of the different looper operation modes by just a turn and press of a button. That easy. You don't really need to set it up custom like you do on the RC-500. Now, probably my favorite mode on the Sheeran Looper Plus is, yes, it's a dual track loop station, so it can run exactly like the BOSS RC-500. You can also run it in verse A-B looping, so you can do like verse, chorus, track bass sort of looping, but the best feature is the sync looping. This allows you to have multiple loop tracks too, but the loop tracks can be different lengths. So this means you could record one loop track that's about 2 measures long. That could be a dead quick drum beat, boom, 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 lay it down dead fast. And then track 2 could be a 8 bar, 16 bar, 24 bar guitar chord progression, a super duper long loop. But because you've done the shorter loop first, they'll be in sync with one another. So you can do your guitar chord progression in time with the drum beat that you just recorded, and then they will constantly remain in sync with one another, which is insane. It just means you can build your loops up so much faster on stage. One of the worst parts about people looping is they bore the audience to death. If they have like an older looper pedal, they'll go ahead and they'll do like a guitar chord progression for 16 bars, the world's longest guitar chord progression, and then they'll have to do a drum beat, boom, boom, ch, boom, boom, ch, for 16 bars, as well as an overdub or as a second track to complement that performance, which means it'll take them 2 to 3 minutes to build up a song. Well, the audience is bored by them, but with this multi-sync mode, you can literally build up a song in like 20 seconds. Bang, bang, bang. And it all stays in time without any glitchiness. You can perform like this with a BOSS RC-500. You can use loop quantize and all that type of crap on that pedal, but there's something about it that just sounds a little bit robotic and glitchy, and it just isn't perfect. So the only way to really loop with different length loops on the RC-500 is with a metronome. You have to have predetermined loop track length. So this is going to be 2 measures, this one's going to be 16 measures, and then you save that as a preset, and then you have to route a metronome out of the rhythm section into a pair of headphones for you to perform on stage with, which just makes it annoying to use. There's no flow to the workflow. It just means everything has to be so segregated and almost gridified. It's annoying. Whereas with the Sheeran Looper Plus, there isn't any rubbish like that. It just syncs really well, and you can loop in free time, and your loops will stay together as long as you're obviously good doing your initial timing and playing along to your drum beat that you will have recorded. This is by far one of the best features and game-changing features that just makes performing with the loop pedal very impulsive. You can just do it in the moment without too much hassle, which is great, because when you perform a lot of, even just little pubs or clubs or garden parties, you'll have people go, oh, could you perform this song? You're like, oh, I don't really know the song, but let's have a go, let's get the chords up and have a bit of fun. So with the Sheeran Looper Plus, it enables that creativity in the sport to just happen. Like, okay, let's try laying down a drum beat. Right, we got the drum beat. Let's try the chords now, guys. Yeah, okay. And then you can have a laugh and engage the audience rather than going, oh, sorry, can't perform that track for you today because I need to make a preset for my loop pedal and then make sure I play at the right tempo with my headphones, and it's just not as cool, dude. Now, just like the BOSS RC-500, the Ed Sheeran loop station also has MIDI capability, so you can connect external foot switches up to loop pedal or sync it up with MIDI clock data to other devices. And probably one of my favorite features when it comes to this loop station is actually the foot switches. Now, the quality of these foot switches on these new HeadRush loop stations is just unbelievable. The size of them is great, which means they're very easy to hit consistently, whereas those little tiny buttons buttons that are on the RT500, those little small like guitar effects pedal style buttons, are just a little bit less confident when you're actually using those for accuracy of pressing. You have to be quite intentional with where your foot placement is. But these Ed Sheeran foot switches are huge. Build quality on them is unbelievable. Like the quality of the pedal, and they're just very responsive. There's no latency to them. You'd assume because they're so big and fat that they would require a lot of force to actually trigger, a little bit like the old BOSS RC-30 foot switches. These are very quick at responding to the actual press. You can touch them quite delicately, hard, you can slam on them, and they just do it. They just do the job exactly the same every single time. The Sheeran Looper Plus is also battery operated. The batteries come included in the box too, just like the BOSS RC-500, so you have the option to run this on battery or run it via a power supply depending on the scenarios that you're going to be using it in. Next, let's take a look at a bigger tier of loop station. We're now going into the multi-track loop stations, you know, 4, 5, 6 loop tracks that you have available to you. Now, before we focus predominantly on some of the BOSS loop stations that have been introduced in this field, there's a new pedal that I want to talk about that I didn't mention in my old video of this because I had no experience with it, which is the Aeros Loop Studio. So this is a loop station that's quite interesting, but also quite niche, I personally think. I've already done a video talking about it that you can check out over here. They did, for transparency, send me out a pedal to take a look at and sort of do, but they didn't sponsor the video. There was no payment or anything exchanged. So I just want to talk about the Aeros Loop Studio because I think for a small segment of the loop station market, it's probably a good pedal for people. Now, most of the pedals that we're talking about in today's video are predominantly live performance pedals or ones you would use for songwriting or practicing within your bedroom. Whereas with the Aeros Loop Studio, I feel like this is more of a, literally it's in the name of the thing, but more of a studio loop station. So something you would use within your music production setup at home, and you would have it MIDI synced to your music production software. And it's a quick way to basically elaborate on ideas. You can sketch them out within the Loop Studio and then easily transfer really high quality WAV data from that into a DAW and then work with those track stems, all those different audio files, straight out that loop station. That's personally how I found it worked very well. It had a similar-ish workflow to the HeadRush Looperboard in terms of its beautiful large screen that you could navigate and the waveforms that you could see on that display. But I personally found it a bit of a chore to use live. I really had to adapt all of my muscle memory and also sort of looping knowledge to try and funnel it and almost force it onto that loop station. Whereas with some of the other pedals, I feel like you have a bit more freedom. If there's any mistakes that you make on stage, you can replace them and fix them quite easily on the other pedals. Where I found this Aeros Loop Studio was a brilliant pedal, had insane features, could do a lot of things, but it just didn't have that almost margin of error that you require to actually use it with confidence on stage. Now, one of my favorite features about the Aeros Loop Studio was its external MIDI foot controller. That was you could use any MIDI foot controller, but you could basically purchase one from Aeros themselves. It was a proper like cool unit that basically it had no setup at all. You just literally plugged it in to the loop station and it would automatically assign all of the MIDI CC presets, and you could just switch between them depending on what you sort of preferred. So it was very easy and quick to set up, and also it labeled what all of the foot switches actually did super duper easily. It was very nice. And the particular version of the Aeros Loop Studio that I tried out was the Gold Edition. Now, one of the best features of the Gold Edition was the new silent foot switches that they added. One of the most awkward things about foot pedals predominantly is how loud the foot switches are. Most of the pedals I'm talking about in this video are dead quiet, like the Sheeran Plus loopers, but some of those normal guitar effects pedals have that awkward like click when you turn them on and off. And sometimes when you're in a small venue that's quite intimate, it's quite awkward when the guitarist on stage, you can hear him go like clicking his pedal board on and off in like quite an intimate silent environment, like acoustic or whatever. So these Gold Studio foot switches were completely silent, so you'd press on them and press off them and it wouldn't make a click noise, which just made it a little bit less cringe when you were using it in those sort of spaces. So that was a brilliant feature, and I would probably recommend the Gold Edition predominantly for that major improvement that it just brought to its overall build quality. Now let's get on to Boss's latest flagship looper stations, and that's both the BOSS RC-600 and BOSS RC-505 Mark II. Now these are some of my favorite loop stations available in the marketplace right now. Now when these pedals first came out, I actually hated them. They had the worst launch in the world. Like the firmware on them was so glitchy. They just felt a little bit rushed or not finished, and it meant there was like a lot of problems I'd never experienced before with loop stations. Like literally these loop stations were freezing, they were crashing. There were so many people in my comment sections on my videos and in the BOSS loop station community that just were infuriated by these products, and to an extent where I actually just went back to using the BOSS RC-300, BOSS RC-505, the original one, for a number of months. And then I finally actually made some videos on these loop stations almost a year after they came out, because it was impossible for me to make make videos and tutorials about them because they were so glitchy. So people would follow the tips and tricks and then just get irritated because they would try at home and go, well, that didn't work, mate, because of just how awful the quality control was when these pedals first came out. Now, thankfully, fast forward almost 2 years, I think they've been out now, 2021, I think they dropped. So 2-3 years they've been out. There's been a couple of different firmware updates on these pedals, and they are thankfully much better to use. They've got much better features set on them, and also they don't freeze anymore, literally, when you were accessing like the main menu. Oh, it was ridiculous. You would literally press like the menu button and it would freeze the whole pedal. And even if you tried to turn it on and off with the power button, it wouldn't turn on and off. You'd have to like disconnect it from the actual wall. It was really bizarre. But I digress. Let's focus on what these pedals actually do. So the BOSS RC-600 is a 6-track loop station, and this replaces the BOSS RC-300, which was Boss's previous multi-track loop station that you could operate with your feet. So that was a 3-track looper. This new one is obviously a 6-track loop station, so it takes it to a whole nother stratosphere. Although it's quite a compact loop pedal, you would first assume it was just a 3-track looper based off of its foot switch layout and just obviously the actual size of it compared to an RC-300. It does have some really cool basically bank modes where you basically click a button and it'll switch over to, bank 2, where it accesses the extra 3 tracks. So you've got bank 1 with your 3 tracks on, then you'll click it and then it'll access track 4, 5, and 6. So it takes a long time to adjust and acclimatize to the new workflow of the RC-600, but the possibilities are huge because of how many loop tracks it has and also the feature set within the pedal that you can really leverage and deep dive into to create some super advanced live looping setups. So it has all of the features that we've talked about on prior BOSS loop stations like the RC-500. It's got MIDI integration, it's got a built-in rhythm section, it's got master settings for both the track settings, memory settings, and also system settings. So the cool thing about BOSS loop stations is it has a whole multitude of different styles of settings. So you have individual track settings. So this means track settings are loop track specific. So I could make some alterations to the length and the tempo sync and the loop track effects on loop track 1, and then I could go ahead and do loop track 2 and change all of those settings again. So we can make this loop track longer, the track effects aren't applied to this track, this does have loop sync enabled or disabled. There's so many things you can do on each track, and you can customize it on track 1 all the way through to track 6. Those are track settings. And then on a BOSS loop station, you've got memory settings. Now these are memory bank specific settings that will apply to the current preset that you've got loaded in. So if you're on memory bank 2, this will be all of the basically settings and things that are enabled and disabled within preset 2. Then if you went over to preset 3, you could customize all of those settings again to make the behavior of that preset be completely different. So the way BOSS structures their menu systems is fantastic for really customizing things and enabling different performance styles for different songs within your set. And then finally, you've got system settings on BOSS loopers, which are global parameters that will be applied to everything on the loop station. So whether you're on memory bank 1 or memory bank 37, the same system settings will apply across the board for all of those loop tracks. This just is great. The way I personally use BOSS loop stations is on a predetermined loop track for each song. So we'll have preset 1 that might be Message in a Bottle by The Police, then preset 2 might be Another Thing Coming by Judas Priest, then preset 3 might be some Ed Sheeran song, I can't remember what Ed Sheeran sings, Thinking Out Loud would be on the preset 3. So then I would have my songs all predetermined, so I'd have a set of maybe 67 songs, all with presets on my BOSS loop station, and then I could just click between those and rejig them depending on what my setlist order was going to be for that evening, or even within Ableton Live with the MIDI settings, do program changes. So in Ableton Live, I would create a custom set list and I go, right, these are the orders for tonight's set, song 1 through to 15, and then I would just click buttons within Ableton Live to trigger a memory bank change via MIDI, and then that would mean all of my BOSS loop stations, whether I was using 1 looper or 3 loopers all connected together in a huge setup, would just all change at a click of a button. Absolutely crazy what you can do with these loop stations, and that's the good thing about the BOSS loop stations in particular. Although they are a bit convoluted with all of the settings and also understanding these settings, once you do understand them, the things you can do with the pedals is kind of very custom, and it allows it to really cater towards exactly what you want. And that's why it's super valuable to check out those product guides that I have linked over on my website, because I'm literally the only guy on the internet that's showing you how to go through all of these settings so you can understand what they do in isolation, and then also a little bit of knowledge of how you can join them and combine them together. Especially if you're watching this video and you have older BOSS loop stations, something you may not have even considered is the fact if you maybe have a BOSS RC-300 or a BOSS RC-505, you could keep that looper pedal and actually sync it up with a BOSS RC-600 or a BOSS RC-505 Mark II or a BOSS RC-500 or a BOSS RC-5, and you can link all of these together to build out a huge crazy live looping setup, which I've done multiple times here on the channel. I think the most we did was like an 11 track or 14 track loop station. We synced up a BOSS RC-5 with an RC-500, with 2 RC-500s in fact, then with a BOSS RC-505, and that was absolutely crazy. The loop tracks were off scale. scale. Anyways, focusing back on the BOSS RC-600, this is a brilliant pedal with a lot of advanced features and huge improvements over the BOSS RC-300, especially in the track effects department and also audio quality department. So the quality of the loop station is much better. It's got higher sort of 32-bit audio. It's got a new processing chip inside of it, so all of your loop tracks with all your unlimited overdubs really do retain audio clarity. You can also hook the BOSS RC-600 up as an audio interface on your PC, so you can throw it in via a USB, and then that will go straight into your PC, and you can just record straight with the inputs and outputs on that, either side of your DAW, whether that be Logic, Ableton Live, etc. You can also do that with the Sheeran Plus, the little loop pedal that I just talked about in the previous section of this video, but you can't do it with the BOSS RC-500 or BOSS RC-5. They don't have any audio interface capabilities. On the topic of the track effects on the BOSS RC-600, these have been greatly improved over the BOSS RC-300. I personally never used any of the effects on the RC-300 because they sounded like the era the pedal was released in, like the mid-2000s, early 2010s. They just sounded awful, whereas the RC-600 has some very usable track effects, especially for the vocal inputs, but also for the guitar. There's things like guitar to bass that actually does do an octave shift very well on your guitar. It will turn it from sounding like a normal guitar to a bass guitar to just layer up your loops. That existed on the BOSS RC-300, but the tracking of these notes was awful. Like, it would just be like, it would just glitch out. Like, it just would sound like utter noise. When it would come to the bass effect, it would sound crap, so you wouldn't use it. But all of those are much better on the processing side, and obviously as well how many effects you can have enabled. The BOSS RC-600, because of the better built-in processor and chip, you can have a couple of different effects turned on multiple different times. I think it's 3. I think you can have 3 track effects on and 3 input effects on, off the top of my head, if I remember that correctly. So again, that allows you to stack effects much better than you could on the old RC-300 that just allowed you to have 1 track effect on. You could hardly change any parameters within that track effect and how it actually operated as well. One thing that is missing on the BOSS RC-600 is an expression pedal. You can connect external expression pedals. You can connect both external foot switches and also external expression pedals to control your track effects or track volumes, whatever you want to do. You can set that up as a custom controller assign, but obviously the BOSS RC-300 had a built-in expression pedal if that's something that you wanted. I personally, of course, didn't need it because I wasn't using the track effects on the BOSS RC-300. I never used the expression pedal. I had it set up on a couple of presets to fade the master volume in and out, which just made it a little bit useful for turning things down on the fly. You know, if the loop tracks were just a little bit too loud and your guitar solo wasn't piercing through, I could just turn the master volume down with literally my foot rather than jumping down on the floor with my hands. So the RC-600 doesn't have that built in, so you will need to purchase an external expression pedal separately if you desire to, but this will have a lot of advantages for some people because obviously they maybe don't want the expression pedal, so it means the pedal is smaller and lighter for them to transport it around in their backpack or their gig bag, which just makes it a little bit easier. Next, let's take a look at the BOSS RC-505 Mark II. Now, this is a completely different category of loop station. All of the ones I've shown you prior to this video have been floorboard units you place on the floor. Now, this is a tabletop loop station that's actually designed predominantly for beatboxers, but I use it as a guitarist, and I'm going to tell you why this loop station is probably one of the best looper pedals for guitarists right now. So before the BOSS RC-505 Mark II was out, I mostly used the BOSS RC-505, which was only known for, it was literally just known for beatboxers, and I was probably one of the first people to use it with a guitar, especially here on YouTube. I was like the only guitar tutorials explaining how you could use an RC-505 as a guitarist, because the problem the RC-505 had, and the Mark II has, straight out of the box, if you are a guitarist, you obviously have to put, you can't control the pedal with your hands because you're using your hands. They are occupied playing your instrument and your guitar. So this meant back in the day, I outgrew the RC-300 and I needed more loop tracks, but the RC-600 didn't exist. The HeadRush Looperboard wasn't quite out in the market either, and I needed something with 2 more loop tracks, which was the RC-505. Now, luckily, the RC-505 had a firmware update in 2016, firmware 2.0, that enabled you to connect external MIDI foot controllers to this loop station and have up to 16 custom controller assigns. So when that feature came out, this meant that you could go from just basically having an external foot switch, like about 3 or 4 external custom controller assigns, to 16. So that meant I could connect my Nektar Pacer, which was a MIDI foot controller that I'd found at the time, to my RC-505 and control every aspect of the RC-505. I could have a record play button for every single loop track, all 5 of them. Then I could use a further 5 controller assigns for play stop commands for all 5 of those tracks. And then I still had 6 further controller assigns to play with for all starts, all stops, whatever else I wanted to control with my feet. So this meant I had the best of both worlds. I could control my 5-track loop station with buttons on the floor with my feet, and then also I could control the 5-track loop station with my hand up at the tabletop for turning loop tracks down, turning track effects on and off, but also controlling loop tracks, recording and stopping them while I was doing other things with my drum pads and also my piano. So it made me go from being just a single guitar looper to a multi-instrument multi-instrumentalist because of this workflow the RC-505 Mark I enabled back in the day. Now, the BOSS RC-505 Mark II took everything to the next level. Now, the RC-505 Mark II is fundamentally the BOSS RC-600. They have the exact same menu system, the exact same parameters, but just in a different encasement. Now, the cool thing about the RC-505 Mark II is it improved the audio track faders, so they extended the length of them and also the build quality. So they made them longer so you could be more precise with fading loop tracks in and out and controlling loop track volumes. The build quality of them is also better as well. There's a bit more friction to how they move. They don't move too easily. But also they changed how easy it is to enable and disable loop track effects, but also route audio via the outputs. On both the BOSS RC-600 and BOSS RC-505 Mark II, the rear I/O on these loop stations is extensive. You can have multiple routings of audio out of these inputs and outputs, and it just makes the loop station very easy to use as a multi-instrumentalist. So you can connect up to like 4 inputs, I think it is, on the BOSS RC-600 and 505 Mark II. So that means you can have a guitar, a piano, a drum track, a microphone, a bass guitar, and then you can specify which end destination these instruments go to. So the guitar's going to go to loop track 1 and loop track 3, the drum kit's going to go to loop track 2 and loop track 4, and then the vocal loop's only going to go to loop track 5. So you can route the audio in a much more advanced manner coming into the loop station. So that makes multi-instrumentalists much easier, so you don't have to use something like Ableton Live to mute your inputs and outputs, so you're not accidentally feeding the microphone into your guitar track and then you get feedback and it's a nightmare. But then also you can control how you output the loop track audio way better on the RC-600 and 505 Mark II. So one of the biggest issues I always had playing on festival stages was the sound engineer had no control over my loop station. So they always would say, hey mate, have you got separate outs for each of the loop tracks so I can control them if they're a little bit too loud on front of house? And I'd be like, no, sorry mate, I can only just give you a master output. That's all I can do on the loop station. So it meant the control they had for making my performance sound the best it possibly could outside to the audience was literally none. They just had a master volume to control my looper pedal, and like that was it. And then my microphone, that was it. Whereas with the 600 and the 505 Mark II, I can route the loop tracks out of the separate things. I can go, right, loop track 1 and 2 are grouped on this output cable, then loop track 2 to 4 are grouped on this cable, and then my microphone outputs grouped on this cable, and then also my guitar outputs grouped on this cable. And then I can give them 4 outputs, and then they would have full control over, well, it's a little bit more control, you could say, over how my performance would sound compared to prior BOSS loop stations, which makes it great for professional musicians, especially if you're on much larger stages. But also, even if you're just a hobbyist or a studio musician, it means you can record your performances with much more control. You can route the audio in your studio much better, whether that be via USB audio options or via the cables, and then you can mix and master your audio way better than you would just with a main left and right output from the pedal. You actually have a little bit of control, so you can EQ things and compress things a little bit different depending on which instrument it is connected to that cable. So that's one of the best features about the Mark II on the RC-505, and of course the RC-600, because fundamentally the feature sets on those pedals are virtually identical. It's just the form factor and amount of tracks you have available that predominantly changes. Now again, inside of my ultimate guides available on my website, I break down exactly how you can use all of these features, but most specifically how you can set up these MIDI external foot controllers on the RC-600 and RC-505 Mark II, and even the BOSS RC-505 as the Mark I. So if you are a guitarist and you are interested in what I just talked about from the 505 series, you can learn all about that. I think one of the tutorials on the 505 product guide is literally like 45 minutes long. I talk you through every single program MIDI CC assigned for the Nektar Pacer, then the corresponding assign controls commands on the RC-505 for everything, so you can get the exact same preset that I use on a daily basis on that loop station. So you've got no questions unanswered. You can literally follow step by step how to set up all of the foot switches to operate exactly how I use the foot switches on those MIDI foot controllers, and then you can replicate the exact same thing within your own personal setup with those bits of equipment. So I'll throw links again down below in the video description over on my website. We can check those out if you're interested. Now let's talk about probably one of the most flagship loop stations in this entire video, and that is the new Sheeran Looperboard, which is it? It's the X, Looperboard X. So this loop station essentially replaces the HeadRush Looperboard. Now in prior videos, I've taken a look at the HeadRush Looperboard. We've got loads of videos and tutorials on that, and also a product guide available on my website for that loop station. And I liked the HeadRush Looperboard. I even said about 2 or 3 years ago, I did a video how to recreate Ed Sheeran's looper setup, and I said this Looperboard is the closest loop station station in the world right now to recreating Ed Sheeran's looping performances on stage. So if you want to be just like Ed Sheeran, this is the pedal you'll probably need. Fast forward almost 3 years later, Ed Sheeran then releases a V2 of that pedal, and it's all branded up with him. It's like I knew, guys, I just knew, had this foresight, I just knew it was going to happen. Anyways, so this HeadRush Looperboard, if we talk about the version 1 first, and then we'll talk about the new one by Ed Sheeran. So version 1 was a 4-track loop station, so it was a huge competitor to something like the BOSS RC-300 that was a 3-track loop station that was starting to show its age in sort of, I'd say, 2018-ish sort of period. Then on the market, this HeadRush Looperboard hit the scene, and it had a touch screen, it had multiple inputs and multiple outputs, so just as I talked about with this RC-600 and 505 Mark II, you had loads of control with how you wanted to route the audio in and out of the pedal and to particular loop tracks, so it just made your workflow much more advanced and also easier for any engineers to work with you on stage or in a studio. And also, it just had a fresh feel to it. It was a big and heavy unit. It was very, very heavy, but it had that touch screen, it had a full color display, it had some built-in effects and rigs that you could set up, and also a very interesting workflow and approach that you could have when it came to how you could use the looper pedals in the states that they could operate within. Now, there were a few things that I didn't like about the pedal, which is why it never really became my main loop station, and I'd also found the love for that 505 with the MIDI foot controller and having that split workflow. So I sort of didn't really feature it much more on the channel because it just didn't really suit, or I wasn't really, to be honest, using it. But now with the Looper X, the new Looperboard with the Ed Sheeran updates, it takes everything to the next level that the Looperboard originally had. So we now have got new foot switches. I never really liked the foot switches on the HeadRush Looperboard. There were those traditional guitar switches. They were just too small and they were clicky and loud. Didn't like it. We've now got the beautiful foot switches that Ed Sheeran's obviously designed with these guys. It's on obviously the smaller pedal as well. Super easy to use. Absolutely insane in terms of how they look and also the build quality on them and how much easier it makes the pedal just to operate on a daily basis. But now as well, we also have these more advanced rigs. So there was some built-in effects and rigs that you could build out on the Looperboard, but because of some of the new processing power, we've got proper rigs that you can build out now. So you can literally plug an electric guitar into the Looperboard and it has electric guitar amplifier sounds inside of there. And then as well, you can stack effects, add your delays, reverbs, etc., and have multiple different rigs and effects that you can access within the menu system. I just feel like it is now the complete all-in-one unit. You literally just need the Sheeran X board, throw it on the floor, you throw your instruments in it, it's got all the effects, it's got good enough sounding amp models inside of there, it's got good quality foot switches, all in one unit. Whereas prior to this, I felt like the HeadRush Looperboard required like a Kemper profiler or some form of external digital guitar amp to route any electric guitar audio into it, as well as some effects as well. I just felt like it just didn't quite have all there. So it's improved a lot of that in that aspect, and it very is a pretty impressive piece of equipment that's available in the market right now. Now, of course, the price of this pedal is one of the most expensive ones in this video. The Sheeran Looperboard's around £1,199, I believe, right now in the UK. Whereas obviously the Looperboard it's replacing used to be around, it was expensive. It was about £600, £700. So it's almost double the price. But I do think for someone who's incredibly serious about looping, kind of warrants that price to an extent with the improvements that it has done upon the older Looperboard that it's replaced. Now, I guess there is a big question as to whether the original HeadRush Looperboard V1 is still worth it. Now we've got the Sheeran Looper X. It's a difficult question for me to really answer that because it depends what you really want out of the loop station. I think most people could probably get what they want out of the Looperboard. So if they could pick that up on a sale, because it will be cheaper now, that yes, that Looperboard is definitely still worth it. It has a 95% complete feature set for what most people require from looping, and they will be more than happy with the growth they could have with that loop station from both learning how to use it and then obviously expanding their knowledge over time and it still being able to fit into that way of them performing. But I do also think it's not shiny object syndrome, you know, oh, this is the newest pedal, but there's just something about that Sheeran Looper station that has got me really excited. Like when I saw it get announced, it got me excited in a way that no other loop pedal sort of has before, and just seeing how the menu system works and the foot switches just feels like it's up to date and also up to standard for basically performing anything you could sort of dream up on the Looperboard X. But I'll leave that decision up to you. Let me know in the comment section down below whether you think the Looperboard's still worth it, or is the Sheeran Loop Station X like the one to go to regardless of, you know, what your budget is essentially. On the topic of budgets, let's talk about maybe saving a little bit of money when it comes to your loop stations. Now, I think the BOSS RC-505 and BOSS RC-300 are still great value in the marketplace. The RC-300 is a little bit on the older side now, but if you want to just do some simple multi-track acoustic guitar looping, kind of like Ed Sheeran to a degree, but with 3 loop tracks, none of the fancy stuff that's going on, the RC-300 is a very capable loop station, especially if you're like a pub or club sort of musician. You can pick them up for about £250 now used, and you can, whack that out in a pub or club, and it really elevates your performance, so you're not just singing away with just same old boring acoustic songs all of the time. It just gives you a little bit of variety within your performance for very little outlay in terms of cash, so it still keeps things profitable for obviously you going ahead and doing some gigs. That's quite a key thing to obviously factor in. There's a lot of hobbyist musicians that will blow £1,000 on some loop stations because they can, because it's a hobby and it's their escapism. But some people might be watching this from a business perspective of actually, I go out and play gigs, don't really want to spend that much because I'd have to do, I don't know, 5 gigs to pay that off versus maybe half a gig or a gig to pay off just like a cheaper used pedal. I also do think the BOSS RC-505 Mark 1 is still 100% worth it in the marketplace. This again can be picked up for half of the price of the RC-505 and Mark 2, but I just think it's a very capable loop station, and it's allowed me to do loads and loads over the sort of almost 3-4 years I used it for, maybe longer, until it got replaced by the Mark II. And I think it's a brilliant pedal that allows you to go from a mid-level loop station to a very advanced loop station, and also it tests you in terms of making you think, how can I fully push this piece of equipment to the max, which then means you get quite creative and learn other things like Ableton Live, MIDI syncing, and so on. Whereas I guess with the 505 Mark II, it can do so much inside of the unit that you may not truly leverage all of what it can do because it's almost too easy to get it set up exactly how you want to, as crazy as that sounds. And finally, I want to talk about some looper pedals that you should probably avoid. I think, in my opinion, you should avoid the BOSS RC-10R. I think this is one of the worst loop stations Boss has ever made in the world. I did a review of this years ago. It was one of my 3rd ever YouTube videos I did. Got loads of hate because I was brutally honest about how crap the pedal was. I just think it's a rubbish loop station. It has a built-in rhythm section that just makes using the pedal harder than it needs to be. And it almost felt like, now in almost hindsight, and now we've seen Boss's release plan for all the pedals, the RC-10R was just a pilot test for their new rhythm section to get customer feedback to then influence how the rhythm section was going to work inside of the RC-500, the 505 Mark II, and obviously the RC-600. It's so obvious that's all that pedal was. It was just a little tester pedal to basically get feedback and understanding of how people liked the way they used the rhythm section and what features they didn't basically leverage. I just feel like it's a rubbish pedal. Like, I used it for a little while and I understood its gap in the market. Like, it was trying to be a songwriting pedal. You can have all these drum grooves that you can play along to, section-based looping. But I found for the price point and who it was targeting, it was actually a very difficult pedal to use for a beginner, even somebody intermediate. I'm a expert advanced looper without being arrogant. I can do things on these pedals, it's insane. And even I found the RC-10R hard to use. I just thought, this is awful. So somebody who had zero experience with a loop station, they get it out once, put it in the box, and it would sit on the shelf for about 10 years before they finally eBay it, and then they'd struggle to eBay it because nobody wants one. So I would avoid the BOSS RC-10R. I think it's a crap pedal. I think it's rubbish to use, and also I think the drum sounds and even the stuff it does with the rhythm section just sounds crap. And you can do the exact same thing with a BOSS RC-500 for the exact same price, but the RC-500 can also be used just as a loop station without having to rely on enabling and disabling that rhythm section on every single preset. The final pedal I would also avoid is the BOSS RC-3. This is the pedal that is now being replaced by the BOSS RC-5. I just don't see the value in getting a BOSS RC-3. It doesn't have any MIDI capabilities. It again has an old BOSS rhythm section on there, like the one you would get on an RC-300 or RC-30. So there isn't many drum grooves to choose from. After you've played with it for an hour, you've done everything that it can do. And also, it doesn't have that new BOSS menu system that the RC-5 has. So it doesn't have the new advanced loop light indicators and all those nice, almost learning aids, you could refer to them as, for a new user. So it makes the ease of use just much less stressful, and the barrier to entry to looping obviously drops dramatically. So I would personally buy the BOSS RC-5 over an RC-3 because I think you'll get longer shelf life out of that product, and also it has more complete elements such as a menu system that will let you sort of get a taster and a feel for the BOSS ecosystem to then allow you to mature and grow into a RC-500 or something like a BOSS RC-600 later down the line. Hopefully you found value from today's video breaking down all of the different pedals that are currently available in the marketplace. Don't forget to check out the links down below in the video description for some of the pedals mentioned in this video, but more specifically my product guides focusing on every single setting and feature broken down into easy to follow tutorial guides. This will help you get the most out of the loop station that you end up choosing so you can perform to a higher level much quicker with the looper pedal and also get the full value out of your purchase. But as always, I've been Ben Rollins. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to learn more about the brand new Ed Sheeran looper stations and all of their feature sets in a full, complete, detailed review, you should check out this video next. And be sure to subscribe for more videos just like this one.